You Booked It, Episode 8. Hey, entertainers and performers of the world. I'm your host, Dane Reese, and welcome to You Booked It, where I chat with inspiring entertainers 7 days a week. By digging into their journey, we're going to discover everything you need to do to be a successful entertainer. You know, because training usually skips that part about how to actually make your skills work for you in the real world. Fellow entertainers, my drive here at You Booked It is to share the inspiring and incredible journeys of successful entertainers. We are here to support your journey. So go to youbookeditpodcast.com and join the You Booked It email community where we dig deep into truly actionable things you can be doing right now to help you book that next audition, submission, or gig. If you enjoy this free podcast, please show your support and search for You Booked It on Apple Podcast or your favorite podcast app where you can subscribe so you don't miss an episode, leave a rating and review. And to show our appreciation for your, fingers crossed, 5-star rating and review, I will give you a shout out on an upcoming episode. And now, let's do this. All right, let's get started. I am excited to introduce my guest today, Ron Remke. Ron, are you ready for this?
I think so. I hope so.
Let's do it. All right. Well, Ron was last seen on the Las Vegas Strip in Cocktail Cabaret in the historic Cleopatra's Barge at Caesar's Palace. He recently completed a 2-year run of Baz Star-Crossed Love at the Palazzo Theater, and you may have also seen him in the final cast of the iconic Don Arden's Jubilee. He is a frequent soloist with symphonies throughout North America, including the Cleveland Orchestra, Indianapolis Symphony Orchestra, Naples Philharmonic, National Arts Center Orchestra, Baltimore Symphony, Oklahoma City Philharmonic, Vancouver Symphony Orchestra, and Fort Worth Symphony, among others. Ron has also visited over 70 countries, that's 70 countries, while singing aboard Silver Seas and Regent 7 Seas cruise lines. Ron has performed in a multitude of regional theaters across the United States. He holds a BFA in musical theater from Penn State, and his debut album, entitled Broadway Classics, is available on Apple Music. Ron, that is a quick intro of who you are and what you've done, but why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself? Fill in the gaps, who you are, where you're from, where you're currently calling home, and a little bit about what you do specifically as a professional in this industry.
Wow, that was quite the intro. It sounds very professional, doesn't it? Yeah, let's see. I currently live in Las Vegas, and I had started off in musical theater. My degree is in musical theater, and as my career kind of moved on, I sort of moved into the, I don't really know if there's a word for this, but I call it I moved into the production singer route for different shows, and what better city than Las Vegas is there for that? So that's kind of when my wife and I moved out here to be in Jubilee, and I've been doing that ever since. That was about 5 years ago. So musical theater was kind of my start. That was a gateway drug. And then I was in New York for about 11 years, and then we came out here. That's
fantastic.
Yeah. So that's where we're knocking around these days.
Perfect. All right. Well, let's move on to the next section. And look, I'm a sucker for a good quote. So what is your favorite quote you'd like to share with our listeners?
This one. Okay. I actually thought about this for a second, and my favorite quote that I still think of to this day came from a dance teacher when I was in college.
Yeah.
And she looked, and she basically looked straight at me, and she said, "Ron, listen to your instincts and then do the opposite." And I still think about that to this day. And I think about how often we as performers, need to be told to listen to our instincts and then do the complete opposite. And it cracks me up still to this day. And yes, I have had dance training. It doesn't always show, but I have had it.
Yeah, but you know what? I think there's a lot to be said about that, because I think by default, we all want to do the safe thing, right? And by adhering to that quote, I guess what you do is you force yourself to do something that you probably really didn't want to do naturally, right?
Oh yeah, and that's, I mean, I think that's the point of a really good teacher, is a good teacher can look at you and say, I know what you're thinking. I know what you want it to look like, but trust me, you're not succeeding. And here's how to fix it. So
Absolutely.
yeah, Spence Ford. I have to give Spence Ford credit.
Beautiful. And how would you say you've applied that quote then to your daily life or your career?
Yeah, it's funny in my career, because I've been doing this now professionally. Well, I graduated college almost 20 years ago, and I think that your growth as a performer is never over. You can be doing the same show for years, and if you don't leave that stage learning something new every night, then and challenging yourself, then you really, then you need to reevaluate yourself, because that's, as a performer, you have to be constantly looking at yourself, and you have to constantly be thinking, how can I do this better? And part of that is thinking, outside the box, and thinking, okay, if this feels right to me, is it right? And is that what the audience is perceiving? Because what you want to do and what is being perceived are sometimes very, very different things. And so I think being able to, as a performer, just being able to step outside of yourself and, be open to criticism, which is really hard, but that's what kind of reminds me to do, just always be open. I'm not always successful at that, but but that's the idea anyway.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's hard. It's hard to, let the ego go sometimes. I think we can all relate to being in a cleaning rehearsal. And I don't think I've ever been to a cleaning rehearsal where anyone is thrilled to be there.
No.
It's tedious. It's hard. You. It's really about needing to, like you said, let go and listen to the director or the choreographer or whoever it is that's doing the cleaning, because it really is about how you're perceived versus how you feel.
Oh,
Because
for sure.
we're doing this for an audience, right?
Yeah, and that I can track back some of my biggest failings as a performer when I have just stopped listening. And it's hard though, because as a performer, part of what makes you good at your job is you are somebody who can stand in front of a lot of people and be very vulnerable. And so there's an element of ego that's involved with that. On the other hand, when you've got a bunch of show ponies on stage, it's hard for choreographers and directors and things like that to corral them into a cohesive unit, or to and I think that also, when I think about my career, the times I've not been successful with understanding that um, directors and choreographers and things like that, they also have things that they need to do. It's not always about you. And I think that's hard as a performer. Sometimes we forget that we're not the beginning, middle, and end of the show. We're a part of it. And so it's always important for me, and I think everybody, just to remember that you have to be incredibly vulnerable, but yet incredibly self-assured at the exact same time. And while that's kind of impossible to do, that's what you should always be striving to do. And you'll err on one side to the other. But yeah, that's what I always. It's nobody wants to be at a cleaning rehearsal, because nobody wants to be told what they're doing looks bad.
Of course. And I can really relate to having my eyes open to the bigger picture. Obviously, when we're doing shows, we know there's so many people involved in these things, but it's very easy to get into our scene or into our roles or the track that you're doing. But I remember the first time I ever called a show as a stage manager, it, it blew my mind, that whole process of learning how to call the show, because you realize how many elements really go into the show. And when the choreographer says, no, you got to go over here, they're not just saying that because it looks better. It's because of so many different factors. It's a moving light. It's so many different things. And it's, as a performer, it's usually not our jobs to even be looped in on that so much, but it's the choreographers and the directors to really present what you're supposed to do and try to help you out doing that without trying to get into the nitty gritty of the technicalities of why we're doing this.
Oh, yeah, and that's the thing. There's so many moving parts that how could you, when you're learning a show or you're putting a show up, you're trying to remember your choreography, remember your lyrics, trying to you could be doing a put in with somebody who you literally just met that day, and you're doing a show that, and I mean, there's so many variables going on. And but there's also, just to be honest, there's also choreographers and directors and people who don't always have the most altruistic vision. And sometimes there are people who are, the theater's a weird place. And I think it's important to just protect yourself, on the other hand of that. So you have to always have that eye of the tiger. It's honestly, it's a duality that is really hard to explain. And it's hard to live through, because just as you said, there are so many variables that it's impossible to do all of them perfectly all the time. But that's the gig, right? That's the gig, trying to figure out how to do that. So,
Yeah, I agree. I absolutely think that it is almost impossible, like you said, to explain that feeling to people or what they're supposed to do until you really get in there and do it. But I think the valuable part from that is, and what people can take away from that, is simply knowing that duality exists going into something. If you're new to a show, if you're new to this industry, know that those elements exist. You don't need to wrap your head around them, but be prepared to deal with them, because you're going to have to.
Yeah, and I think also doing your best to have something else going on in your life, so that if you hinge your entire life on work, it can be really depressing, and it can be really aggravating, and it can be really, I find this to be true, especially in situations where if I'm on the road or if I'm very isolated, and you don't have a home life really, you have a hotel or a cabin or something like that, and you kind of get a little bit myopic in your vision, and you just sort of only think about the show. I think that can be dangerous. So it's important to always have something else going on, so you can just turn it off. It's singing and dancing. It's important. It's very important. But at the same time, other things are important too. So I think it's important to just kind of give yourself a reality check every once in a while.
Yeah, keep perspective.
Yeah.
Great. Well, let's move on to the next section now. So, Ron, you're an entertainer. Obviously, I am an entertainer. And I think you'd agree that the entertainment industry is one of the most subjective, brutally honest, personally emotional industries in existence. And you know as well as I that in order to create and have a successful career in this industry, like you're having now, takes a lot of dedication and hard work. And while there is an outrageous amount of fun and excitement to be had as an entertainer, there's also, that fair share of obstacles and challenges and failures that we will inevitably experience and we have to move forward through. So tell us, what is one key challenge, obstacle, or failure you've experienced in your career, and how did you come out the other side better because of it?
Whew. I mean, I could write a book on it. I think this career, I think this career is, I think people see this career the wrong side up. We think of this career maybe as let me just describe it. So if you think of like a pyramid, right? You think of the top of it, that's showing as the applause and the fun stuff and all that wonderful thing. But we forget about the foundation that it's built on. And very often foundations are just as tall or just as big as the actual building that they're built on. And, there's sort of like, there's three parts of any gig. I think if you can get paid well, to do what you love, and to find it artistically fulfilling, like that's like the trifecta of any job. And to tell you the number of times that's actually happened in my life is probably, I don't know, a handful. I've probably done hundreds of jobs, but I would say maybe 5 have actually been all 3 at once. And I think that, to speak in broad terms about the disappointments,
the problem is we sell this career to young kids, especially, the opposite way. This career is about the work and disappointments. Occasionally you get a wonderful moment, but if you're not in love with the work, and if you're not in love with, frankly, the disappointments and the difficulties, then this career will be really shockingly difficult, especially initially. And that's not, I'm not saying that to be, I don't know, I don't want to be, sound like I'm being negative about it, because I chose, and I still choose to be a part of this career. But I think that we need to be honest about what it is. This career is not the only career that's like this. Lots of careers are like this, you know, because people, when they see me sing a song for 3 minutes in front of a symphony orchestra, they think that's my career. They don't realize that 3 minutes took 20 years of experience, plus, you know, it took an overnight flight and, you know, a week in a hotel and missing, you know, every wedding I've ever been invited to, and, you know, funerals too. And so, you know, there's a lot of pain that goes along and difficulty with this career, but it is worth it. At least it is for me for now. But I can think of a specific, I remember specifically, I was in New York, and this was many years ago, and I had auditioned for production of Beauty and the Beast, maybe. And I got through, oh, well, that's a good, I'll tell you a different story, actually. I had just come off of a cruise ship, and I was auditioning for a new Broadway show. And the new Broadway show was coming out, and they had not opened yet. And so they were looking for a male swing. And I remember going through the final audition, singing and dancing, and just, you know, getting to the very, 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 very end. And the director and choreographer pulled me aside afterwards. And I was broke, man. I was broke. I was New York broke, man. I had nothing going on. And they pulled me aside and they said, listen, we really like you. And when an understudy for the lead comes up, we're going to call you. But right now, you don't fit what we're looking for. And I remember walking out on 42nd Street, turning the corner up 8th Avenue, and just breaking down. And it was so depressing and so upsetting, because I had nothing at that point. And finally, I had this career dangled in front of me with this show. And, you know, the show's still running 10 years later. And I didn't get it. I didn't book it. And I remember I got a call and did a cruise. I went out to do a cruise ship a few weeks later. But I remember I couldn't even call my mom. Couldn't, you know, it was just a horribly depressing situation. And I remember thinking what was so bad about it was I felt embarrassed that I didn't book it, right? And I felt really like I'd let people down. And I think that was the thing about this career that surprised me, is when you're not successful, you know, if you have a bad performance or you don't do something well, it's this feeling of letting people down, whether it be an audience, your colleagues, your family, you know. And it's also because you're supported in this career, whether you know, it's very difficult to be a performer and not have support from other people, whether it be financial, emotional, you name it. And so I still remember that time, and it's hard, it's heartbreaking. You know, most people do 5 or 6 jobs in their entire life, but we as performers, we're constantly looking for new work and new work and new work. And what people don't realize is sometimes getting a job is like winning the lottery to us, because the other option is like, you know, passing out flyers, or, you know,
yeah,
which is also weird. You go from being the star of the show one day to, you know, cleaning up dirty dishes the next. And yeah, another quick story. I was taking a final bow in front of the Cleveland Orchestra, which is probably one of the best orchestras in the world. It's in front of 15,000 people. And I was taking a final bow next to it was me and 2 Broadway celebrities. And I looked down, and the bottom of my pants had like a little piece of scrap of food on it, because I was catering earlier that week.
Oh man.
I mean, that's the reality of this business. And that's the kind of thing that I think we as performers, you know, sort of have to acknowledge and be okay with. for heaven's sakes, you know?
Yeah, and is that kind of is that where you're going with as far as where you've learned like from these failures? Is that you do what you need to do, or I mean,
You gotta,
what did you?
yeah, you gotta do what you have to do and understand that, you know, it's kind of like being in an abusive relationship with this career. You know what I mean? It's just weird. It can beat you up, but when it's nice, it is the best nothing beats it, right? And so you have to somehow learn how to deal with those disappointments, and you have to learn how to mourn. I remember when I was in New York as well, we were just all of us were just broke, and if we got anything, I mean anything, if you got a call back, we would celebrate with a really cheap bottle of champagne with me and like all my roommates and friends, because we just had to start celebrating. Like even if you didn't book it, you got a call back, that was a celebration. You just find the little things to celebrate,
Yeah, celebrate the
because
wins.
yeah, and I think the other thing is also learning what you can and can't control. You know, with that audition that I didn't book, that had nothing to do with me. That it had nothing to do with me. Sometimes it has a lot to do with me. Sometimes I'm just rubbish. But other times it has nothing to do with you. It just has something to do with the situation, and learning how to differentiate between I can do better, I need to do better, I wasn't prepared, or you know what? My hair's brown and they didn't like it.
Right, because it
So,
really gets that subjective, you know?
oh my gosh, yeah. But you know what? Sometimes it is your fault. Sometimes you don't book things because you're just not very good.
Absolutely. We all have bad auditions, have a bad night on the stage. It's the inevitability of doing things over and over again.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
All right, well, let's move on to the next question. And this is the section that I like to call your spotlight moment. This is the moment in time that you realized, yes, I'm going to be an entertainer for a living, or yes, this is what I need to be doing as an entertainer. Tell us about that.
So I guess I can do very quick. There was a moment when I finally, I think, felt the real moment of yes, this is what I can do. I was singing Gethsemane in front of the National Arts Center Orchestra, which is sort of the National Canadian Orchestra in Ottawa. And I had a 100-piece choir behind me. I had a full symphony orchestra, and I just finished probably one of the most challenging songs in musical theater rep, and it went really, really well. And I got a standing ovation and a curtain call. And now I was in my mid-30s when this happened, and I had performed a lot before that, but this was the first time I remember actually thinking, I need to be doing this. And I know that sounds like a silly thing to say, but every day as a performer, you wake up and you think, this might be the last day I do this career, because it's hard. But I remember after that moment thinking, no, this is important, and this is something I should be doing. And it was a very humbling experience, and it was a very powerful experience. But that was the one time I can still harken back and think about it and go, yep, this is what I need to be doing. I mean, but I got into performing kind of in a weird way. I was going to go to school for engineering, and I got accepted to Penn State for engineering and musical theater. And I remember Penn State called me and said, you have to decide what you're doing.
These are two really big majors, so
yeah.
Make a choice.
So let us know what you want to do. So I kind of tiptoed into this. I did not like come out at like 8 years old and go, I'm going to be a performer. I was sort of not that kid. I did it, but I wasn't really, I didn't see my first Broadway musical until I was 16. So I gradually grew into this career and evolved slowly and just kept, trying to get better every year. And so I didn't have that moment as an 8-year-old that some people have. I wish I would have. I would have probably been better sooner if I would have had that, but I didn't. I was doing other things. I was playing baseball. I didn't really, so.
But we all have our journeys, and it is what it is, and we make. I mean, you've made an incredible career out of this in like from this industry. So there's nothing to be worrying about or complaining about, I think.
Yeah, it's definitely. I have had some incredibly fortunate situations that I have somehow been around the right people at the right time, and I'll be the first to admit there are people who can sing circles around me, um, and so I'm very fortunate to have been able to make a living, a comfortable living, doing this. And I've also been supported by supportive friends and family. Um, I don't think I could have done it without that. And I never had parents who looked at me and said, "Okay, are you done with this now?" It was never a situation where they, "Are you going to get a real job?" And I never had that. It was always like, "Well, you know what? You didn't book it this time, but there'll be next time." And they taught me how to save money, and they taught me how to be smart about the logistics of life, which so many performers, I don't think have that advantage. So I was very well taken care of, which is what I think allowed me to make it to nearly 40 years old and still be in this career.
Wow, yeah, absolutely. Well, let's move on and piggyback on that question. What was your number one booked it moment? Walk us through that day, the audition and callbacks, if that happened to be part of it. What was going on in your life, and what about that moment makes it your favorite booked it moment?
um, I think one of the moments that I was so thrilled about, because I had wanted to do this for so long, was a Christmas show. I was actually in the middle of the ocean somewhere on a cruise ship, and I had been emailing these people back and forth, and I had submitted some vocal recordings and things like that. But it was a Christmas show that I wanted to do so badly. It's with the Indianapolis Symphony. And I was sitting in the crew bar at probably 2 in the morning, but I think like Indiana time, it was probably the morning. And I got this email, and it said, and the host for that was Sandy Patty. So I was getting to do a show with Sandy Patty, who, if you don't know who Sandy Patty is, she did contemporary Christian music. She still does, but she's a singer who's really popular in the 80s, I guess. I grew up listening to her, and my family did. And so I remember I got an email saying that I was hired to do the Christmas show with Sandy Patty.
Wow.
And I was just, I remember my wife, she wasn't my wife at the time, but she was sitting next to me. And I was just like, I can't, A, believe I'm going to have a job, but B, with Sandy Patty. I was floored. And I tell you what, she was everything I hoped she would be. She's magical on stage, and she, if you were not familiar with her, just do a little YouTube search, Sandy with an I, and but yeah, I still remember that, sitting in a crew bar after a performance on a cruise ship and hearing I was going to perform Sandy Patty. So that was a lot of fun.
That is a fantastic story. I love that. Well, let's take a moment to look at the present. What projects are you working on now? What are you looking forward to? And I know that we are, of course, in the middle of this global pandemic, but how do you see the entertainment industry moving forward in the next couple of years?
Yeah, wow, that's I don't know if I'm qualified to hardly answer that. I mean, I hope that this pandemic has shown people that human interaction can't be substituted. We need human beings in the same room doing things, because even this, we're doing the interview virtually, right? We're in two different locations.
Yeah.
And it's just so difficult. I think people have learned, I think isolation is difficult. And so I'm hoping that what it does to the entertainment industry is it might bring back some of the more intimate performance venues, places where people can go and be closer to the action. I'm hoping that things become a bit more local. We don't necessarily need to bring in acts from all over the world. We have local musicians in every city in this country and the world who are just as good as anybody else, and we need to support them. And I'm hoping that through this pandemic, you know, artists are amazing. When we have a challenge, we rise up and we adjust and we change. And as artists, we're always evolving. I've been doing lots of just private time singing, tackling music I've never sung before, pushing, usually when you are in a normal situation, I don't like to push myself vocally too difficult. I probably have a show that night, or, you're always sort of thinking about project to project to project. Well, right now, my next project on the books isn't until, it's about 6 months away. So
right.
I have the time to sort of just, experiment and play and record myself in a bedroom and play it back and cringe or think, oh, that's pretty good. And, I think that it's allowed me to have the freedom of not working towards a project, but just kind of working on me and taking a step back as well from performance and looking at other art forms and enjoying the TV art form and the book art form and the podcast art form and all those other art forms that aren't just theater based. So I'm hoping that this pandemic clears up sooner than later and we can kind of, I don't want to just get back to usual. I want to get back to better. I want to get back to the more innovative, creative, intimate spaces.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. All right, well, let's move on to one of my favorite sections in the interview. I call it the Grease Lightning round. So I'm going to ask you a handful of questions. I want you to answer them as quickly and concisely as possible. Boom, 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 right after another. Are you ready?
I think so.
All right, first question. What was the one thing holding you back from committing to a career as an entertainer?
Money.
Second question. What is the best piece of advice you have ever received?
Don't be a jerk.
Love that. Third question. What is something that is working for you now, or if you'd like to go pre-COVID, what was something that was working for you before our industry went on pause?
Warming up with a straw.
Really, talk about that for a second.
So I got into figuring out how to warm up effectively is a science, but it's also, a little bit of experimentation. So one of my colleagues was like, have you tried doing a warm up with a straw? And I said, I have not. And so they showed me how to do it, and it changed my performances for the better. Consistency, all those sort of things. So you can just YouTube it. Basically, you just get a straw from wherever and you phonate through it, and it causes back pressure. I've done it in the middle of a show to like reset the embouchure if you're doing like a crazy wild piece to a quiet piece or whatever. So it's been really cool.
Big stylistic differences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You can go from some rock pop to some good old classic standards.
Perfect. Yep, that's exactly right.
Very cool. All right. Well, here's the next question. Fourth question. What is the best resource, whether that's a book, a movie, a YouTube video, podcast, a piece of technology, whether that's hardware or software, that you found is helping your career right now?
YouTube.
YouTube, love it.
I mean,
just YouTube in general.
Yeah, I mean, that's a sort of a non-answer. I think what has helped me by YouTube, I mean, research, like listening to other singers and just random people, just pulling up live performances of old singers or young singers or new singers or whatever. Just listen your ears, listening to people, exposing yourself to different artists as much as you can.
Fantastic. And the fifth question, this is probably my favorite one, and it is, if you had to start your career from scratch, but you still had all the knowledge and experience you've collected from your career in the entertainment industry, what would you do or not do? How would you do things differently or the same?
I would have started dance class when I was an infant. I think that would I would have paid attention to I think that would have probably enabled me to work more when I was younger. I don't need it as much now, but when I was younger, I think it would have enabled my career to be just a little bit more robust when I was in my 20s.
Yeah, I mean, when you really look at it, at the end of the day, there are almost always more dancing roles than there are singing roles in any production.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So there's just a higher probability that you could book it.
Exactly. And you know, I am still, when I go into auditions, you know, it's me versus a 25-year-old sometimes. And quite honestly, I have a lot more experience than that 25-year-old does. And we look very similar. And you're going to usually book it over a younger person. Just that experience pays off. And so when I was 25 competing against somebody in their 30s, like I got it. Like, you know, they were better. They had 15 years of experience on me. They better be better. So, you know, that isn't always the case, of course, but I would say that the younger you are, the more necessary it is to dance.
Yeah,
for sure.
I'm inclined to agree with you. Yeah. So let's move on to the last question. What is the golden nugget knowledge drop you've learned from your successful career in the industry that you'd like to leave with our listeners?
I mean, I don't take everything I say with a grain of salt, because anything I say, somebody could say the opposite and they could both be true. There are no absolutes in this career. And at some level, you just have to listen to your gut and do your best.
Love that. Perfect. And let's wrap this baby up. It is time to give yourself a plug. So where can we find you? How do our listeners connect with you? Is there anything you want to promote?
Well, man, I wish I could say come see me but right now, come see me performing in my office, usually around 4 p.m. But the next show I have on the books right now is with the Seattle Symphony, and it's going to be in the middle of January for 2021. But in the meantime, I have some videos on YouTube, and if you search Ron Remke on YouTube, you can find me. And yeah, I'm pretty easy and accessible. If anybody wants to contact me, they can hit me up on YouTube or Instagram. And yeah, I'm not hard to find.
Great. And what's your Instagram handle?
It's at Ron Remke.
Well, that's easy, isn't it?
Isn't it? Yeah, there you go.
Perfect. All right. Well, fantastic, Ron. Thank you so much for doing this today.
Of course, it's my pleasure.
Thank you so much for joining us today. My one call to action for you is to go to youbookeditpodcast.com and join our free email community, where we dig deep into a continually growing resource of truly actionable things you can be doing right now to help you advance your entertainment career. Don't miss an episode. We have a new guest 7 days a week. Search for You Booked It on Apple Podcast or your favorite podcast app and subscribe today. All the best to you. We'll see you tomorrow.